Hello and welcome to Wholesome Monday, where we dive into a wholesome story. I've decided to switch it up a little bit for Mondays and read a little bit of a longer form story. I posted a poll on my Patreon and they have chosen Nancy's Mysterious Letter. This is, I think, the eighth. Oh, it tells me right here, the eighth book in the series. I would love to start with book one. Unfortunately, it is not out of copyright in Canada until like 2073. It's different than the States, I guess. But this one is, in case you're wondering, copyright law in Canada states that you have to wait 70 years after the author's death. So the lady who wrote the first Nancy Drew book died in 2003. So yeah, you can't. Her books are not like out of copyright. Any of the Nancy Drew books specifically that she wrote will not be out of copyright until 2073. But in the United States, the copyright law is just like 50 years after published, I think, which is why the very first Hardy Boys in like 2024 came out of copyright in the United States. But because the author of Nancy Drew book 8, 9, and I think 10 died obviously 70 years ago, we get to read this book. When was this book written? That's going to tell us a lot. 1932 is when the first copyright came into print by Simon and Schuster. I decided since these books are from the 1930s, I would wear something super scandalous for 1930. And if you've seen my bookshelf tour, you will know that I own quite a few Nancy Drew books. They were a childhood favorite. I read all of the ones from the public libraries in my cities, or in my city, and at one point did want to own all of the yellow backed ones. I don't know if I've given up per se. It is just an endeavor I have decided to continue, maybe perhaps when I have more money. At least expendable income for more books. It would be nice to at least get 16, 17, 18, and 19, to say the least. Anyways, so Nancy's Mysterious Letter. This is what the cover looks like. The one that I have, at least. And I don't know if you guys read Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys as kids. I forgot they had these like really nice line drawings in them. I don't know if you can see that. But yeah. Ned pulled Nancy down to the pavement. There is 20 chapters in this book. So I guess if I read a chapter a week, that is 20 weeks, which is almost I guess we can commit to like 2 books a year or see how it goes depending on how many chapters, how long the chapters are. What I'm hoping is I will read a chapter, I will post the audio onto Spotify, and then you can either watch my video or you can listen to it in your downtime on Spotify, and then we can talk about the chapter. Since that's what this is, we're diving into literature, we are discussing it down in the comments, and also I'm quite interesting, just because I haven't read any of these since I was a child, what things sort of come up just because it is the 1930s. I know Nancy Drew herself as a protagonist is a young white woman. I believe she's 17 or 18 in the books. It might be that at the beginning of the books she's 17 and then eventually she turns 18. Her boyfriend is Ned. Her father is a high-profile attorney. I'm pretty sure he is like quite high up in the hierarchy. So she lives a very comfortable life and she solves mysteries. As a kid, I did not know that Caroline Keene was what's it called? The word escapes me right now, so I'm gonna just pop it up here because I can look it up. It's like ghostwriter. Caroline Keene was not a real person, It was actually a bunch of different authors that wrote all of the Nancy Drew books. And you do kind of get that if you read the different ones. They sometimes have a little bit different tones. So Nancy Drew was written by both men and women authors. And maybe I can look it up and I can pop their names up here so we can give some credit to the actual authors. We appreciate all of the hard work that the writers do. That was a very long intro. My intros for the rest of the videos hopefully won't be as long. How about we start with the synopsis? It says, by mistake, Nancy Drew receives a letter from England intended for an heiress, also named Nancy Drew. When Nancy undertakes a search for the missing young woman, it becomes obvious that a ruthless, dangerous man is determined to prevent her from finding the heiress or himself. Clues that Nancy unearths lead her to believe that the villainous Edgar Nixon plans to marry the heiress and then steal her inheritance. During her investigation, Nancy discovers that Nixon is engaged to a racket that involves many innocent, trusting persons. The thrilling hunt for Nixon and the heiress takes Nancy in and out of many perilous situations. How the teenage detective saves the British heiress from the sly, cunning schemer makes a highly intriguing story of mystery and suspense. So without further ado, let's just dive right into chapter 1. And I will fix my hair. All right. Chapter 1. Stolen Letters. Oh, poor Ira, Nancy Drew exclaimed and slowed her convertible. There's your first clue. She's a teenager and she has a convertible in the 1930s. Nancy Drew's not struggling out here. Nancy Drew needs to share her wealth with me. and all of my viewers too. Wouldn't that be nice? A convertible for you and a convertible for you. I don't need a convertible. I just need a reliable commuter car. Continuing on. The two girls with her turned to look toward the sidewalk. Trudging along was an elderly mail carrier. He was lugging a heavy bag over one shoulder. His head was down and his eyes were almost closed against the strong November wind that swirled leaves and dirt around him. Mr. Nixon, Nancy called out of her open window, let me give you a ride. The mail carrier looked up and managed to smile. Hello, Nancy, he said. Thank you, but I have to stop at every house. Lots of letters today. There's one in the bottom of my bag for you. It was sent airmail from London, England. How exciting, Nancy said. Well, I'll see you at the house. She added, I'll have some hot cocoa waiting for you. Mr. Nixon smiled and Nancy drove on. I don't know anyone in London, she said to her friends. Who could be writing to me? The attractive... I don't know how to say that word. Titian blonde? The attractive Titian blonde, blue-eyed girl at once became lost in thought. Another mystery, probably, remarked her dark-haired companion, George Fane. George was an attractive, slender girl who kept her hair short and always wore tailored clothes. Her cousin, seated next to her, was blonde and slightly overweight. When Bess Marvin grinned, her deep dimples showed prominently. Maybe you have an unknown admirer in England, Nancy, she said. George gave Bess a dark look. Do you always have to think of the romantic side of things? Bess tossed her head. What's more fun? She retorted. The three girls were returning from an overnight visit to Redgate Farm, where at one time Nancy, with the help of her two friends, had captured a counterfeiting gang. The solving of that mystery had been followed by Nancy's tracking down the clue in the diary. The trunk of Nancy's convertible was filled with fruits and vegetables from the farm. When she reached the rear of her home, the Drews' housekeeper, Miss Hannah Cruin, opened the door and rushed down the steps. Nancy, you're home, she cried out, and gave the girl a hug. Hello, Bess. Hello, George. As Nancy unlocked the trunk of her car, she said, We met Ira Nixon down the street. He's bringing another mystery. She told the housekeeper about the letter from England. Poor Ira is half frozen. I promised him some hot cocoa when he gets here. I'll go right in and make it, says Mrs. Gruen. You girls unload the car. My, what a lot of stuff, and it smells wonderful. Nancy and her friends had just finished putting the farm products into the Drews' cold cellar when the front doorbell rang. Nancy hastened to answer it. Mr. Nixon stood there. As he set his mailbag down in the vestibule, Nancy thought, "He looks so exhausted. I hope he can finish out the year until his January retirement." She led the way into the living room. Nancy, although eager to see her mail, resisted the temptation to ask for it. She would wait until he was ready to give it to her. A few moments later, Bess came in carrying a tray with 4 cups of cocoa. Behind her was George with a big plate of homemade cookies. Hannah Gruen, who had lived with Nancy and her father since the death of the girl's mother when she was 3 years old, was an excellent cook. She enjoyed baking and often surprised the family with delicious cakes and pies. Ira Nixon sipped his cocoa slowly. He nibbled on a cookie and slowly color came into his thin face. Hannah Gruen walked in with a pot of cocoa and refilled everyone's cup. As the mail carrier finished the second cup of cocoa, he said he must be on his way. "I almost forgot to give you your letter," Mr. Nixon said as he stood up and went directly to the vestibule. A moment later, the girls heard him cry out and rushed to his side. "What's the matter?" Nancy asked. "The letters! They're gone!" "What do you mean?" George asked, peering into the bag. "There was nothing in it but magazines." "All the letters still to be delivered have been stolen," Ira Nixon exclaimed. He began to sway and the girls quickly grabbed hold of him. They led him back to the living room sofa. "Oh dear," he moaned. "Only 6 weeks more to my retirement and now this disgrace." Bess tried to soothe him, but it wasn't your fault. "It's a rule that a mail carrier must keep his bag with him at all times," the man said. I'm going to show you the lovely line drawing in this page so you guys can all see. "When they discover all the letters have been stolen," the mailman exclaimed. Suddenly, George turned to Nancy. "Your letter from England! Now you'll never know who sent it." "And that's not the worst of it," Ira Nixon spoke up. "I also had a registered letter for Mr. Drew." "There may have been an important document in it." The girls and Hannah Gruen looked at one another almost instantly. Nancy sprang into action. "The thief can't be far away," she said. "We must try to catch him." The 3 girls put on their coats and dashed out the front door. The Drew home stood well back from the street and was reached by a curving driveway. "You girls go left," Nancy suggested. "I'll go to the right." They ran to the street and looked in all directions. Bess and George, seeing no one, hurried to the corner. Then George went left and Bess right. In the meantime, Nancy had spotted little Tommy Johnson, who was riding his tricycle on the sidewalk. She hurried to talk to him. "Hi, Nancy," he called out. "I just made a new record. Want to see how fast I can go?" "Some other time, Tommy," she answered. "Tell me, have you been riding past our house?" "Sure thing." "Did you see anybody from there in the past few minutes?" Nancy asked the 5-year-old. "Yep, a man." "What did he look like?" Tommy thought for a moment. "Well, he was real thin, and he was taller than you, and he was in an awful hurry." "What was he wearing?" Nancy prodded. Tommy giggled. "A yellow coat and hat." Nancy was puzzled. "You mean a yellow raincoat and rain hat?" "Nope, it was a winter coat and hat like my daddy wears." "And it was yellow?" Nancy asked. Tommy nodded, then he grinned. "Nancy, while I was racing, I was playing 'tective like you. I can tell you something else." Nancy stooped down so that she was on eye level with Tommy. "Tell me everything," she pleaded. "Will you give me a 'tective's badge if I do?" he asked. "I sure will," Nancy promised. "Now tell me quickly what else you can tell me about the man in the yellow coat." "I can't tell you anything else about him, but I know something about his car." "Oh, he was in a car?" "He sure was," Tommy replied and began to laugh. "It was a beat-up old thing. I guess he's pretty poor." "What color was the car?" Nancy asked. "Same as his coat." Tommy paused and then said, his eyes twinkling, "You know what? I remember some of his license plate. The first part was TJ, just like my name." Nancy asked excitedly, "Do you remember the number?" "Not all of it. It was too long. But the first 2 numbers were 1, 2. "Oh, Tommy, you've been a wonderful help to me," Nancy said, giving the little boy a hug. "One more question. Did you see the man carrying anything in his hand?" "Yep, he had a lot of letters, and he was stuffing them into his pockets." Nancy realized that the suspect by this time was too far away for her to find, but she was excited by the excellent clues the little boy had given her. She thanked him and returned home. At the front door, she met Bess and George. Her friends reported they had had no luck. Nancy told them what she had learned. As soon as they entered the house, she hurried to the living room. Ira Nixon sat slumped in the corner of the sofa, but when he saw the girls, he looked up hopefully. "Did you find out anything about the letters?" he asked. "I didn't find the thief," Nancy answered, "but I did pick up an excellent clue. Mr. Nixon, do you know a tall, slender man who wears a yellow overcoat and hat? And has a beat-up car with the license plate TJ12? I don't know the rest of the numbers." To the surprise of Hannah Gruen and the girls, Ira Nixon uttered a cry of dismay. The blood drained from his face. He put his hands over his cheeks and exclaimed, "No, no, it couldn't be. Oh, what will I do?" Ira Nixon slumped forward in a faint. And that's the end of chapter 1. Oh, that was exciting. I would love to go over and talk a little bit about this chapter. Because while they were, I don't honestly know if these are would be considered elementary school fiction or middle school fiction. I personally read them in elementary school. I think across grade like 3 and 4, I want to say. But I do want to point out some of the things that are highlighted very well here in chapter 1. First, that Nancy is driving a convertible. In the very first sentence, like immediately tells you that Nancy comes from money, right? Especially because we know that Nancy is a teenager. And I don't know what it was like for teenagers back in the 1930s, but I imagine they were not all driving convertibles. Maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, sound off in the comments, let me know. The other thing is her call to Mr. Ira to help him carry the letters. This immediately tells the reader that Nancy is kind and thoughtful. And then also how she mentions that she will have some hot cocoa waiting for you. The hot cocoa, so she first stops, she offers to help him, and then because he says that he has to stop at every house, like there's no way that logistically, like getting in a car and delivering letters is possible, she says she'll have some hot cocoa waiting for him. So all of these are giving you a sense of Nancy's character without explicitly telling the reader in exposition, right? This is all being done through character action, which is great because, the main theme of fiction is show, don't tell. And honestly, even in school, my teachers were constantly harping on us, show, don't tell, show, don't tell. There is a time for exposition and telling the reader through paragraph sentences, but really the best writing is when you can show the reader your characters through character action. So then you get this lovely exchange between them where she's excited about her letter for England. You get the shameless plug where they mention the clue in the diary, which is Nancy Drew book 7. So they're like, hey, if you didn't know, this Nancy Drew book is part of a series, right? It's kind of funny because if you think about it, modern books, you would never have the author write into the story itself about the previous book, right? Or about their previous series. But I love how it's honestly, like as a kid, I don't know if I would have really thought too much into this. I would have been like, oh, cool, like this sounds like a previous story. The clue in the diary even is in italics. I don't know if you can see that on the page. The lighting isn't great, but if you can, I will check in post. But yeah, it is in italics. So it's very like, hey, get your parents to buy the other books. In my opinion, I guess. I feel like that's kind of funny. I wonder if they do that in other books. I would be curious. So then, sorry, they come home and we meet the Drew's housekeeper. So this is another indication that Nancy comes from money, right? And I'm not saying that she's rich. You don't have to be rich to have a housekeeper, but just taking into consideration the time, she definitely is living an upper middle class life in America, right? And then Nancy immediately mentions to the housekeeper that she promised the mail carrier, Ira Nixon, the hot cocoa. And of course, the housekeeper goes to, like, immediately to make it. Just that Nancy offers the mail carrier hot cocoa and then comes home and tells the housekeeper she promised the mail carrier hot cocoa. There is almost like an expectation there that Nancy expects not to have to make the hot cocoa, that the housekeeper will do it. This gives you a deeper look into not just her and how she's growing up now, but how she grew up in the past, right? Because if she's coming home, if she didn't have a housekeeper her whole life, she wouldn't come home and necessarily immediately expect the housekeeper to make the hot cocoa. And I would love to hear your comments also, like down below. I obviously grew up in the 90s. I did not have a housekeeper. If anyone watching this grew up with a housekeeper, what was it like? And then I guess you further get more of Mrs. Gruen as George comes in with a big plate of homemade cookies. And you sort of get that Hannah Gruen enjoys baking and often surprises the family with delicious cakes and pies. I feel like this is a shallow view. I'm sure the housekeeper has other hobbies. And I understand in a children's book, you're not going to spend a lot of time on the housekeeper, but I do find it very telling of the times that what the author chose to describe that the housekeeper likes doing as a woman is baking. And then page 4, you get the photo, of course, and after they've finished enjoying their hot cocoa and their cookies, they go back out, and of course the mail bag is just full of magazines. There are no more letters. They have been stolen. Then Nancy and her friends jump into action. They go out, they try to find it, and Nancy sees Tommy. Of course, Nancy would find Tommy because she's the main character. That's a given. And because this is book 8, I don't know if Tommy is mentioned before. It seems like, based off of their conversation, they do have a history. Tommy looks up to Nancy and wants to be a detective like her, so he practices his detective skills. Even though he's 5 years old, you do get this sense of pride when he tells her all of these things. I love how that comes through in the text. Sorry, there is one moment specifically. Oh, yeah. Tommy paused and then said, his eyes twinkling, "You know what? I remember some of the license plate." You just get this sense from Tommy, even in this very short interaction, that he really loves not just showing off, but specifically being able to tell this information to Nancy. Like, he's very proud of the work he's done. And honestly, as a 5-year-old, he should be. What 5-year-old remembers all of this, right? And while in some books, this might be construed as a deus ex machina, like there just so happened to be a 5-year-old and he just so happened to remember all of this stuff about the person who stole the letters. But because of the way that it's set up, you kind of can be forgiving of that. And I love how that comes through in the text, right? It feels less like a deus machina just because of the way that it is set up. Because of the way that Tommy's character is set up, because of the way Tommy and Nancy's relationship is set up. I guess it will play into your suspension of disbelief enough that you're like, yeah, I can see, like, I believe it. And also you still get that he's asking for a detective badge if he does a good job, right? So you still get that sort of kiddish, boyish charm in there too. And then it ends kind of on a cliffhanger, right? Because we get the sense that Ira Nixon knows exactly who stole his letters. And you have to wait until chapter 2 to find out, hopefully, who that is. Which chapter 2 will come out next Monday. Tune in next week to find out who, hopefully, stole the letters. But yes, I guess I will end it there. Do please let me know your thoughts on chapter 1 in the comments below. I do think they did such a good job of first setting up the characters, setting up the story, and immediately in chapter 1, we're invested in the story, right? We already have a mystery. Where are the letters? We've already have a sense of who Nancy Drew is, what her character is like. We get a sense of even her detective skills, right? Noticing Tommy, immediately going over to him, the questions she asked. And you get a sense of how other people view her in her interaction with Tommy. You see how he reacts when she's asking him the questions, right? And then obviously they end the chapter on this little bit of a cliffhanger so that you immediately want to jump into chapter 2, which I really do want to jump into chapter 2, but I will wait and be patient like everyone else. But yes, I do really hope you will share your comments and let me know what you thought below. If you noticed anything else in the chapter that I missed. And yeah, if you like what I do here, if you want to see what more I do, you can check out my Linktree. I also have a Patreon. My lowest tier is only $1.50 per month. I do also have a Discord channel for anyone who supports me on Patreon for at least $5 a month. And if you would like to see my spicier side, my less wholesome and more erotic stories, those are also posted on my Patreon on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And yeah, I will see you guys all on Thursday for Poetry Thursday and next Monday for chapter 2. Bye! Thank you to everyone on my Patreon. Your support means so much to me, and I couldn't do this without you.